Tonight I'm going to be talking about more of concepts and those kinds of things. I won't really be giving like an exact layout of like how to do it, but I'll hopefully be giving you coaches a lot of ideas for how to develop your own program, and maybe if you already have a program, develop some things that you can either do more efficiently, do a little bit better, those kinds of things. So real quick, I just wanted to introduce myself to you guys. I'm originally from a small town south of Lansing, Michigan, called Eaton Rapids, and there I played football and wrestled and ran track, and it was there that I kind of developed my love for strength and conditioning. I had a really great high school strength coach, and then after I was done at Eaton Rapids, when I graduated, I went to Trine University in Angola, Indiana, which is a small Division III private school, about 2,500 students on campus. And there I played 4 years of college football and earned my bachelor's of science and exercise science. And then while I was in college, I did some personal training and some different internships and volunteering. But then when I finished, I went to Northwestern State University, which is in Natchitoches, Louisiana. And there I worked with their Division I AA football team and Division I men's and women's basketball, baseball, softball, those sports. After that internship ended, there wasn't really a job available for me, so I decided to go back to Michigan and work at the high school level. And I went to Truman High School, which is in Taylor, Michigan, on the south side of Detroit, right next to Detroit Metro Airport. And hopefully some of the coaches I work with there are listening tonight. But that situation wasn't the best for me. So when the head football coach from Truman got a job out here at Granville, when he asked me to come coach with him, it was a no-brainer. I moved out here, moved in with my fiance, and I haven't looked back since. So I've been living out here for about 3 years, and when I'm not strength and conditioning coaching, I do my own weightlifting, and I recently was a national medalist, and so I really love this strength and conditioning thing. So enough about me. I'm going to move on. Tonight, I'm going to talk to you guys about a whole bunch of different stuff, but here's kind of an overview of what I'm going to be sharing with you. We're going to be talking about really the big picture, planning things out, how to adapt a program to your specific situation and setting, and then some protocols and things for, again, just kind of structuring your workouts and your training week and summer, or however long you're doing your off-season program, structuring things to best fit your situation. Because one thing I'll talk about later is one thing that really bothers me is when coaches use a cookie cutter strength and conditioning program and they really don't tailor it to what their facility has and what their kids need and things like that. So first thing that we're going to talk about is macro cycles. So a macro cycle is, again, just a fancy scientific word for the big picture. Your macro cycle is going to be the entire program's overview. So generally speaking, one macro cycle for the school year or for your athlete's development is going to be 12 to 6 weeks. So since we have a lot of football coaches on here, to make it easy, your one macro cycle would really probably be your late spring conditioning program leading into your two-a-days in August. So at this time, like before you're even starting, so usually for a lot of coaches, it'll be about this time of year, maybe a couple of months down the road, you're going to want to be planning out and creating a master schedule, getting the list of holiday breaks and key dates. In the state of Michigan, we have, we have a dead week, and then we have an off week the week before seasons start and things like that. So it's really important to get all those things planned out, when you have 7-on-7s, when you have all those things, and make sure you have those plugged in before you start looking at the schedule that you're going to generate and the workouts that you're going to generate. So, and I'll talk about that on the next slide a little bit more. But I think it's pretty important to create a schedule and make sure that your athletes get it well in advance. Our coach here at Granville will probably hand out the summer schedule in either April or May. So that way kids that are older kids that maybe are getting a work schedule, they can give that summer schedule to wherever they work, and hopefully work out a work schedule where they can get in. Their parents maybe can rearrange their schedule somehow so they can better get them to workouts. So that's one of the biggest reasons why we do that well in advance. I also think it's pretty important to set goals. If you have the time, set goals with each individual athlete, or have some sort of growth goals, attendance goals, those kinds of things, and also set goals for the teams. Whether it be your program as a whole, if you're talking about your football program, or if you want to set goals for your freshmen, your JV, and your varsity team. I think it's really important to set those goals so that way you have something that you're working towards and something that you can judge the success of your program off of. I also think that it's important when you're thinking about your macro cycles that you plan out when you're going to do pre-training and probably also your post-training max out sessions for your lifts. And then at this time, I think it's also important before you go into the big picture of things is really to prep your assistant coaches and your team coaches to not only with what is expecting of them in either the weight room or the conditioning program, especially over the summer, but also prepare them, to teach techniques and do those kinds of things. Maybe if they're football coaches, you need to prep them for things outside of the football realm, teach them how to, teach like squat and bench, and maybe teach them how to better help you with, teaching speed work and those kinds of things. So I think it's important to almost like clinic your assistant coaches that are going to be around so you can have, kind of a unified vision and unified, really unify, everything that you guys are doing essentially. So just like, getting ready for the football season. So next thing that we're going to go into is mesocycle. So a mesocycle, again, is just another fancy word for a smaller block of training. The bigger block of training, the macro cycle, is your whole program. A mesocycle is going to be generally like 1 month of training. That's, at least with our program, I usually do one mesocycle. It will be one block of training for 1 month. And it worked out really well this past summer for us that when we got out of school in early June, that we had 3 weeks before we had a down week, a dead week for the 4th of July. So that actually worked really well. Generally, when you plan out training, you want to train out a few weeks of training where you're gradually building up and things are getting progressively more difficult. And then you have a deload or unloading week between blocks of training where athletes can get a little bit more rest and recover. And that's really a lot of times where you'll see your biggest gains, is that we really build up, and then we take a little bit of rest time and just kind of get the athletes refreshed a little bit. And then the next week when they come back, we can actually see usually their energy back and the gains that they made in the last block. So that's why we want to plan, again, according to the dates and the start of the team season. We were really lucky that this past summer just kind of fell together where we got all of our blocks pretty much perfectly planned out. So one thing to keep in mind when you're doing, when you're planning out a mesocycle is whether you want to do linear or undulating periodization. So with linear periodization, we're going to have, it's really just straight line where you're, at the beginning of the summer, you would have your amount of volume, so your sets and reps, you would have like a lot of sets and reps and then a lower amount of weight. And then as you get closer to the season, when you're trying to peak for the season, you would have significantly lower sets and reps and significantly higher intensity. So one thing that we really like to do here at Granville that's worked really well for us is that we have a focus with each one of those mesocycles, one of those blocks. And we just repeat this schedule for really every quarter of the year. So for the summer, for really May, June, and July, leading into the start of fall sports, we get 1 month of each one of the training programs. So our method looks like this. We have our first 3 weeks, our first month is called the building block, where we do a lot of eccentric and isometric movements, where we're moving slow and we're pausing and we're really building up technique, and we're building up the positions of the body, building up, their ability to get lower in the squat, their ability to hold, keep their back flat when they pull power clean off the floor, and those kinds of things. And generally that cycle is going to be significantly lower intensity. Generally, if we're looking at our 1 rep max of our lifts, we're going to probably have everything be less than 70% of our 1 rep max. And then we'll have pretty high volume, a lot of sets and reps. Because again, we've got that lower intensity, lower amount of weight on the bar. So we're really going to build up and start preparing their body, preparing their work capacity for more sets and reps and more weight. That second block that we use, again, I call it the growth block, because we go to standard movements, just normal squats, normal cleans, normal pretty much everything, and we really up the weight and up the volume. And I just want the athletes to have great movement quality. I want to move fast, I want to move efficient, and I really just want to beat them up pretty good for about 3 weeks. And then again, we'll deload, we'll unload, and we'll go into a power or speed or peaking block. I've called it a little bit of everything, but that's really going to be super low sets and reps and really high weight. And then we do a lot of what's called contrast training, where we'll do something really heavy where it's kind of slow, and we'll immediately go into like, for instance, we'll do heavy back squats, and as soon as they rack the bar, they'll immediately run over and do 3 box jumps. So they go from a super heavy movement to a super fast unloaded movement to build up power. So the next thing, microcycles. Again, microcycles are just a smaller version of the cycles. It's really your weekly routine. A microcycle would really just be 1 week. So when we're looking at our weekly structure, a couple of things that you really want to keep in mind is how much time do we have available for training? This is one of the most important things, because
hey, Coach.
Yep.
We have a question for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is do you do anything during the deload week, or is it a complete week of rest?
Now, that's a really good question, because when I would love to, unfortunately, during those dead weeks, we can't be in contact with the athlete at all. So if I have a dead week, if I plan that as a deload week, I'll send out emails and put things on social media that the kids can do on their own, because a lot of the kids are in the area, can go to the YMCA, and they can do things like that. But generally, I would like to just have them come in, and we do just, everything that we would normally do would be light. So yes, if it fits in the schedule that they're going to come in and train, we do a light amount of work during those deload weeks. But if it falls into the schedule where it's some sort of a break or something like that, then there's only so much I can do about getting the athletes in. So I hope that answers that question. So with our weekly structure, again, make sure that you are getting, the biggest thing is making sure that we are efficient with the time available. So the time that I was given this summer with our football coach was we had an hour and a half for about 120 kids. So the way that ended up falling was that we split our session. We would have all of our running backs, because in our offense, we only have offensive linemen and running backs. So the way we split the team was all the offensive linemen would come in and lift for 40 minutes, and then they'd go out to the turf and do speed work with our football coach, and then the running backs would flip-flop, and we would have about a 5 or 10 minute transition period. So whatever time you have available, make sure that you are using it to the fullest, and that you are doing body split or an upper lower body split, or whether you're going to do full body workout. So you'll see here later on, I'll show you our schedule that we used over the summer. But right now I've got the athletes in the weight room 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so because of that schedule, getting days in between, we go full body workouts. Now, during the summer, our football coach likes to have our football players go Monday through Thursday, and then they get Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. So since we're crunched with those 4 days together, most of the time we'll do a more heavy upper body day, and then the next day will be more of a lower body focused day, and we'll alternate those back and forth. So hopefully we're not beating the athlete up nearly as much. And then if you have the time, if you have the space available, you also want to try to make sure that you're incorporating speed work as much as possible, so that we're using the strength that we're building in the weight room to apply that strength to their sport specific speed and agility. Now for your daily routine, this is, again, you can do this whatever way works best for you, but this is the method that we found that's the best. And from working with other coaches around the country, this is generally the best structure for your workout. So doing a warm-up, I would suggest, and I'll talk again about just structuring your warm-up here in a little bit, but doing a warm-up and then going to your speed work when you have your workout built up, going to speed work when
Coach.
Yep.
You have another question?
Yep, I just saw that one come up. I'm going to finish on the speed work thought, and then I'll come back to that question.
Okay.
So we want to go to our speed work right after our warm-up when our athletes are most fresh, if that's possible. Again, right at the beginning, we're going to get the freshest athletes, and we want them to be moving as fast as possible. We don't really want them to be doing as much speed work, where we want them to be moving really fast after they've already exhausted themselves with strength exercises in the weight room. So David asks, are the athletes in football split up by position when they work out? So generally with our workouts, we'll have them split by position, and that's really just because that's the best way to quickly get all of our kids into groups, because we never have the exact same kids every day. So one day we might have 60 kids, and the next day we might have 120, and it really sometimes is that drastic. And so the fastest way to split them up is just to say, running backs, you go there, linemen, you go there, and then we go to our session. So there's a lot of different ways to do that, and however you end up, however much time you have will really determine how you break those athletes up. Some teams do, if you have kids that are just offensive players, you do an offensive, if you platoon your team, you just do an offensive, group and a defensive group. Or, if you have 3 weight training sessions, maybe you do a defensive line, a linebackers, and a DBs. There's a lot of different ways to do that. So, yeah, I generally just split them up that way because that's what's most efficient for us. After we finish our speed work, generally that's when you want to go in and start doing your strength work. It also, speed work, doing sprint work before you go lift your legs can help your athletes to be warm and to be feeling and moving fast and explosive. So generally you can get a little bit better of quality of explosiveness out of your athletes after working some explosive technique work out, on the field or whatever. After doing your strength work, that's when we want to go into conditioning. So That's, again, after we've finished all that stuff where we want our athletes to move fast and powerful, that's when we can go and do our conditioning and really work on their energy systems and their anaerobic work capacity. And then after that, that's when they're still really warm, that's when we want to go do foam rolling and stretching and do those things and work on their flexibility. So let's see. Working. There we go. Okay. So for facility considerations, this is another one. This is just what I was talking about at the beginning, that it really drives me crazy. Now, I understand that some coaches don't have the background that I have, but if you can employ somebody to help you do a strength and conditioning program, try to avoid a cookie cutter program. I've seen quite a few strength and conditioning programs where I see, the football coach got a program from another team or something, and they try to apply it to their weight room, but the workout calls for everybody at the beginning needs to be doing squats. Well, that's great if your weight room has, 10 squat racks and you only have 30 kids in the weight room, then you can get, a pretty efficient session. But if you only have, 5 squat racks and you have 60 kids in the weight room, that's not going to work. So you have to try to come up with a strength and conditioning program where everybody can be working and getting quality work in, and there's not a lot of downtime or sitting around doing those kinds of things. So the ideal training group size in your weight room would be 2 athletes to a station, 1 lifter, 1 spotter, and then pretty efficient. We end up with this setup with 3 athletes to a station. That's what we end up with most of the time, where we have 1 lifter, 1 spotter, and then 1 kid doing an accessory movement or an accessory lift or a core lift or something like that. And then our athletes, eventually, sometimes, like I said, we'll have up to 120 kids show up for weight training. So sometimes we get into 4 athletes to a station. And at that point, it's not maximal, but you can work with it pretty well, where you get 1 lifter, 1 spotter, and then 1 kid doing an accessory lift, and maybe 1 kid doing a core lift, or maybe even that kid, that 4th kid is just resting. But again, you'll get better energy and better efficiency out of your workouts if your kids are moving a little bit more often and not sitting around quite so often. And really, by a general rule, more than 5 kids to 1 station is going to be much too inefficient. So try to avoid more than 5 if at all possible. And then just think outside the box, come up with different ways. Instead of always having to use dumbbells or barbells or pull-up bars or those kinds of things, figure out ways to use, body weight exercises when equipment's not available, or if you have bands or those kinds of things, or partners resisting exercises and those kinds of things. If you think outside the box, you can really build up pretty efficient workouts. So for warming up, again, this isn't something that I'm going to hammer on too much, but generally we follow this warm up and prep, movement prep guideline. And actually, I taken this from a couple different coaches. I have some friends that work at a gym in Fort Wayne, Indiana called Athletes with Purpose. And down there, they use a similar method to this. And then also a coach out in Boston named Mike Boyle, who's pretty famous as one of the OGs of strength and conditioning. He prescribes this method as well. So if the athletes can come in early, you want to have them foam roll and get a lacrosse ball out and roll things out. And then after that, they can do some static stretching and work on maybe some areas that are tight. And after that, they want to go into their dynamic warm-up. Now, if you don't have time for those first 2 parts, just skip right to the dynamic warm-up. During a dynamic warm-up, we want to be doing movements that are preparing our athletes for whatever they're going to do for the day. Now, for our football team, since we have 120 kids, our dynamic warm-up is going to be pretty much the same every day, where we're hitting a full body general warm-up. And that's really the most effective way to go through that warm-up, is making sure we're doing a lot of hip preparation exercises. You don't have to do a ton of exercises where we're specifically prepping the knee, but making sure that we're working on balance and stability, and getting the hip and back and shoulder ready to work, as well as getting them sweating. That's really one of the biggest things. Before the athletes get working out, we've got to raise their core body temperature, and we know we've raised it when they start sweating. So now, if you have more time, or if you have smaller groups, you can do a specific warm-up where they're coming in maybe right to the weight room, and you're having them do dynamic warm-ups that are preparing them for exactly the lifts or exactly the speed work they're going to be doing for that day. When in doubt, though, just keep it simple. Keep it to 5 to 10 minutes. Make it hard. Make it a few exercises. Make it easy to manage. Doing line drills is a great way to organize the athletes and get them moving. Or just having everybody doing the exact same thing at the same time. We do that sometimes, where I'll just have the whole group in the weight room or in the gymnasium, and I'll have them all doing the same warm-up exercises, getting ready, and then we break off into our group. And then if you also, again, have time, if you can, prep your athletes for specific movements. So you can see my athlete here in the bottom of a deep catch on a clean, and on that day I specifically remember we prepped his hips and his back, warmed up and really worked on that external rotation of being able to push his knees out and get into that bottom position. If you can work those kinds of things, and those are goals that you're seeking, then add that into your sessions if at all possible. So a few things that we want to keep in mind when we're selecting exercises. I got another question here. I can give some examples of hip prep exercises. That would be something that maybe at the end I'll provide my email, and you'll be able to send me an email on it. I didn't have it as a part of my presentation here. There's really a ton of things that you can do, hip stretches and mobility exercises. So again, that's something that I'll provide you my email, and I can send you some resources on that. I believe that was Kyle. So when we're selecting exercises, we want to, easy, I keep flipping that over. We want to prepare our athletes for the season. So one of the biggest concepts that I believe in is general physical preparedness. With high schoolers, we don't want to be sport specific, especially I hope that your athletes, that you're encouraging them to play multiple sports, in which case we don't want to make the most efficient football players or the most efficient swimmers or basketball players or whatever. We want our athletes to be just great, fast, healthy human beings. And so I think it's very important to have a general physical preparedness outlook and approach to strength and conditioning. One of the biggest things that we do here at Granville is I really like to have a 1-to-1 push-pull ratio. So what that means is, again, like if an athlete does 10 squats, then we're going to do 10 hamstring curls or 10 pulling exercises to balance out what they do on the front side. Because when I first got here, there were so many kids that had benched so much that they were forward rounded, and their shoulders were way out in front of their chest. It looked like their chest was caving in because they were so tight, and they just hadn't built up any strength in their back. So I think that 1-to-1 push-pull ratio is pretty important. And you can either do that day to day or just count up a total week and try to make sure you're hitting that week to week. So for the repetitions, when you're selecting the repetitions that you're going to have, generally with very heavy weights on your power lifts, we want to do 1 to 5 reps. When we start getting above 5 reps on those exercises, we're not getting as much of the power benefit. Really, if you want to be working on power, power is really just the amount of weight that you can move and as quickly as you can move it. So we want to try to do those power lifts, your Olympic lifts, as heavy and as quickly as possible. For the most part, we won't go above 3 reps. We do sometimes when we're working on technique go about 5 reps on those. So sorry, just trying to make sure I didn't have any other questions. So the next thing that we can get into is muscular strength, which is just kind of a little bit slower. For instance, if you're doing heavy deadlifts, we're working on more pure strength, total strength, than we would just be on flat out power, like with a power clean or a power snatch or an exercise like that. From 6 to 12 reps with kind of a medium weight, we're working on muscular hypertrophy or muscle growth. And then from 10 reps and beyond, we start working on muscular endurance and kind of some health, like prehab, those kinds of things. Whenever you hear me say volume, I'm just talking about sets times reps. The total amount of work, sets and reps that you're doing is your volume. Your intensity is going to be the percentage of your 1 rep max or whatever rep max that you do. And then, or your rate of perceived exertion. So if you do like a scale from 1 to 10, how difficult it was, your intensity would be like a 7 if it, you feel like you had a couple of reps in the tank. You also hear me talk about eccentric, isometric, and concentric lifts. Oh, got a new one. From Tim is asking about yoga. I think yoga is great. That yoga would be something that you would add to your program and do as a part of your mobility after you've done a workout. So when the athlete is really warm, that's when we want to go into yoga and work on improving their mobility and their flexibility. So with eccentric training, that's just going to be slow lowering or negatives, as some people call it. Isometric training is holding the repetition or the exercise, and then concentric would just be normal lifting, normal repetitions. Another thing that I talked about before was contrast training, where we do something really heavy and it makes us feel kind of slow, and then we do something really fast that's usually unweighted or very lightly weighted. So we can build up power. Also, we want to keep in mind our rest periods. So generally, if you're working at a lower intensity, like if we're working with a lot of sets and reps at low weight, we want to take shorter rest in between sets. If we're at a medium intensity, so I would usually say like 65 to 80% of their 1 rep max, want to take 1 to 2 minutes rest in between sets. And then at a high intensity, so if we're going for max effort or max, trying to hit a 1 rep max or 2, 3 rep max kind of thing, then we want to take 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 minutes rest in between sets. But now that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not doing anything for that rest period. You can have them do other exercises, core exercises, stretches, corrective exercises, things like that, but rest in between sets of a specific exercise. And so here's kind of a simple template that I generally tell coaches when they're looking to change up their program. If you're going to do a full body routine, do 1 knee dominant lift, so like a squat, 1 hip dominant lift, like a deadlift, and then if you're doing full body, do an upper body push, so like a bench, an upper body pull, like an upright row, and then do a core exercise. If you're going to do a split routine where you're doing a focus on either upper body or lower body, you'll want to do a multi-joint movement and then a unilateral movement, so a one-sided movement. So a multi-joint upper body push would be a bench. A unilateral one would be like a one-armed bench press or an alternating dumbbell bench press, and then a core exercise. All right. So incorporating speed and agility with these programs, I generally suggest, if you can, splitting it up and having a day where you do lifting and a day where you do a day where you do speed work and alternating those days. But if that's not available to you, like you'll see here in a little bit, our program from over the summer, then on a day of weightlifting, we want to do speed work before we do our heavy lifting. And then we also want to try to work on our linear speed, so our sprinting work, acceleration, moving forward and back with our lower body days. And then we want to try to work on our lateral speed with our upper body days, so our side-to-side shuffling and crossover running and cutting, those kinds of things with upper body days. If you do it in between lifting days, then you can really just pick a focus for each day. So generally we have on Tuesday will be our linear speed day where we're working on, excuse me, acceleration and top end speed and deceleration, stopping and starting. And then we'll also have a day, usually Thursday is going to be our agility day where we're working on shuffle cuts, crossover running, fast footwork and those kinds of things, moving side to side. And then always try to make sure that you're taking time for recovery and mobility. So if you have a day between lifting days, then usually you can use that as a day where not only you're getting that focus of that speed work, but you're also taking time to roll out, stretch out, and take care of the athlete's health so that the next day when they go into lift, hopefully they're not feeling as crappy as they were when they went to their speed work day. And then a general structure for speed workouts is to do your plyometrics. So we always start our workouts with jumping exercises because that's the best way to build power, especially if you have little or no equipment. Right now, since it's the winter, I have no gym space and I have no hallway space. So in order to build speed, we have some room in our weight room to work some acceleration stuff, but for the most part, we're going to do a lot of jumping and plyometric exercises, and those can build a lot of explosiveness when you can't work on those specific acceleration things or running things. After you've done your plyos, you want to work on speed techniques. So I really believe in super slow progressions, building one exercise at a time, one drill at a time. I'll show some of those here in a little bit. And then going into technique application, so using that slow technique or whatever you're working on for the day, and either doing a repetition drill where you're doing like sprint repeats or something like that, or doing a competitive drill. One of my favorites is to do just like a lateral pro agility shuttle where two athletes start facing each other and they race to, try to, beat each other. We do that on like an agility day, a side-to-side movement day. And, if one athlete beats the other, then the athlete who loses has to do 5 push-ups or something like that. And then at the end of your speed work, if you're going to do conditioning for that day, you would do that at the very end, sprint repeats or ladders, suicides, whatever you want to call them, or if you do Raider runs, any of those kinds of things, you would want to do that at the end, just so that we can work on having our best energy when we're wanting to work on skills and speed. So here's a real quick look at our strength and conditioning program from over the summer. So our first block of the summer was our building block, like I talked about at the beginning of the summer, doing a lot of sets of 5 and sets of 3. Question from David, do I include cool downs after a workout for strength and conditioning? It really just depends on how much time a coach gives me. If I have general strength and conditioning groups that aren't a specific team, I will have specific mobility, cool down, stretching, flexibility exercises for them to do at the end. Not anything crazy, usually just 5 to 8 minutes at the very end of a workout, because most of my sessions aren't going to be more than 60 minutes. So that's how we incorporate cool downs. So with our strength and conditioning workouts, again, pretty high volume. Now with eccentric work, one thing that we get is time under tension. So if you look at the total amount of work on our eccentric pause and pulls, or really any of our eccentric stuff where we're lowering it slowly, you can see this 4-2-1 tempo. That means we're going to lower the weight for 4 seconds. We're going to pause at either the bottom or the top of the movement, whatever the hardest part of the movement is, and then we would do the easiest part, or which normally the hardest part, as quickly as possible. So an example of that would be if they were doing pull-ups, they would go up to the bar as fast as they could. They would pause with their chin above the bar for 2 seconds, and then they would very slowly lower themselves down to straight arms for 4 seconds. So I usually do that on a cadence. I will make all the kids in one session do the exact same thing at the same time. So that's how I incorporate that. And then during our building block, we do circuit training to build up that work capacity and that exercise capacity. And then again, we always start sessions during our building block with technique work. So that's where I get all of the kids. Doesn't matter if they're a senior or if they're an incoming freshman. We'll start out their session by working on our Olympic lifting technique. I'm a huge proponent of the Olympic lifts. I think that they build power and speed and really all those things that we're trying to build with our off-season conditioning. I think they build them better than any other exercises that I've worked with. So every day we'll work an Olympic lift for the most part, other than one day we'll usually have as just a strength workout or just an accessory lift day. And then every day we're trying to incorporate speed and agility. So Monday we had acceleration work, which was paired with our power cleans, our fastest exercise for most of the kids. And then we work on shuffle cuts. On Tuesday, top end speed, so working on our super high speed on our snatch day, and then crossover run and agility again on Thursday. And then we flip-flop this workout schedule. We always flip-flop Monday and Wednesday and Tuesday and Thursday every week because there's a lot of kids that get in the same schedule where they miss Monday every single week. So I don't want those kids missing power cleans every single week. I don't want them missing back squats every single week if that's the day that they miss. So we flip-flop those days every single week, so that way those kids that aren't coming in on the same days are hopefully getting that day of work that they didn't get the week before, and getting those exercises they didn't get the week before. During our growth block, we just change over from doing everything slow to just moving at kind of a normal pace, trying to work on speed and work on, again, more work capacity. And I have all this stuff right now. At the end, I'll provide my email, so if anybody wants this presentation, you'll be able to get that from me. So I have another question here. Do you work on developing core at the end of the workout, legs, leg lifts, back, and ab exercises? So the way our workouts are generally structured are exactly how you're seeing on the slide here. We do our Olympic lift first, and then we do an accessory lift to either that, or we'll do a strength lift. So like we do a clean deadlift, or we do pull-ups, or we do our back squats. So it's usually an Olympic lift and a squat, an Olympic lift, or like an upper body strength exercise. And then we do our accessory exercises. So like on this day, on like Monday, it was, we did split squats. And then during that accessory time, we'll do like a set of split squats, and then we would do, they would superset those where they're doing a set of split squat and then like a set of planks, and they alternate those back and forth. We'll also sometimes just do our core work at the end as like a circuit finisher to really burn the kids out and kind of beat them up a little bit more. And then at the end of the summer, we had our power block, which our power block, we go from doing more percentage stuff to now doing like to the day maxes. And this is really just for our advanced kids, like our varsity football team, where they would come in and they're going to hit a 3-rep max power clean. And eventually that built into the last week of the summer where we were doing regular 1-rep maxes. And then they would use that max from the day to do their clean pulls. I put 105%, but a lot of times they'll just tell them to add 5 to 20 pounds to whatever they hit for their max for that day. And then a lot of times we'll do those super heavy exercises and superset them, again, with that contrast training with a fast explosive exercise. So for instance, with our pull-ups, we do weighted pull-ups or whatever the hardest version of a pull-up they can do, and then they immediately follow that slow, difficult pull-up with an overhead medicine ball slam where they're explosively contracting their lats and their shoulders. And so that's how we hopefully we have our workload reduced enough that the kids aren't as beat up and they're feeling pretty healthy going into the start of 2-a-days. I also believe in a really a 4-year development plan. So with all of our workouts, if you can structure it this way, we do beginner workouts, which their workout program is going to be different than the older kids, where we build technique. We use body weight exercises to build their strength. And then we really focus on their movement quality. As most of you know, our kids sit in desks all day long while they're at school. And so they really build up poor hip flexibility and low back flexibility. Sure, a lot of you have seen kids in the weight room that can't, keep their back flat when they go to do a deadlift or a clean. So the first thing that we do with all kids that are coming in is build up their ability to control their body and their body's ability to do all of the movements. And then when you're working with those kinds of kids, we always want to have progressions and regressions in mind of each exercise. So if a kid can't do a push-up, they do knees down. If they can't do a knees down push-up, they do a push-up with their hands on the bench, so on and so forth. Or if a kid's really good at push-ups, you have them do weighted push-ups, or you have them do, band-resisted push-ups, those kinds of things. And come up with standards for those beginners and only have them move on to the next, workout plan if they meet the standards that you set. Here is just a chart that I made of progressions for beginner athletes. So you can see the blue exercises are really for beginners, and then the green ones were for advanced or intermediate athletes, and then the red ones were for advanced athletes. Now, that doesn't mean that my beginners won't ever do like power cleans or deadlifts. It just means that we're not going to load those up super heavy. We're going to work more technique on that stuff. And then we're going to have them work on, the easier, especially body weight exercises as their primary lifts for building strength. And then as they progress along, I generally have intermediate and advanced kids. And this is really just based on how well they move and how well they build up strength. We really want to see them, as they progress, start beginning to load barbell movements and start doing movements with dumbbells and those kinds of things. And for our intermediate athletes, since they haven't really built up any skill with the lifts, I'll have them do a 5 set by 3 rep scheme for Olympic lifts and 5 by 5 for strength lifts. And they just add 5 pounds per week or 10 pounds per week for their lower body lifts until their progress stalls out. And then that's when we move them to the advanced program, if they are proficient in the lifts and moving well and have a great control over their body. And then really our 11th and 12th grade advanced program is going to be a collegiate level strength and conditioning program, just like what you would see with college strength and conditioning. So that's the end of the presentation. If anybody has any questions, I think we're going to open it up for, I already got a good one here. So feel free to shoot any questions you have at all right now. I'm going to try to answer as many as you can. So in-season workouts, great question. Now, for our football team, they lifted twice a week. Monday and Wednesday. Monday was a lower body day with in-season workouts, I believe, in reducing their volume by a significant amount. So very, very little sets and repetitions, but keeping their intensity fairly high. So generally on Mondays at the beginning of the season, we do we would do power clean and back squat, so more of a leg heavy day, and generally working on being, having those pretty heavy. Most of our kids leading into the playoffs this year were lifting more weight than they were at the end of the season because, again, we were hitting 85, 90, 95, 100%, sometimes even maxing out lifts during the season. And then on our Wednesdays, we have our workouts are more upper body, again, just so that their legs aren't beat up heading into Friday. But the principles are the same, whether we're doing split jerks or power jerks on that day, we'll still load them up pretty heavy, or bench press, we still load up all those things pretty heavy. So David, I hope that answers your question. What type of accessory work do we do during our block phase? Jordan, I'm not sure which block you're asking. The building block, the growth block, or the power block? Building block. Okay, so during the building block, we do a lot of more like body weight movements or body building movements. So that's what we'll do. We'll do mostly like push-ups, pull-ups, inverted rows. Really, we stick to a lot of body weight movements, doing a ton of reps of those during our building block. What are the essential equipment you have to have in the weight room? Now, I take a functional approach to strength and conditioning, so I believe that now, I don't mean by functional, I don't mean a bunch of exercise balls and those kinds of things. I mean just having our athletes standing up and their feet planted on the ground. So our weight room mostly consists of barbells and plates and dumbbells. And then we also have some medicine balls and exercise balls and mats and those kinds of things. But if I was to open up my own gym and I had a limited budget, I would just want a weight room filled with squat racks, benches, barbells, and bumper plates, rubber plates that can be dropped on the floor. What are your thoughts about in-season going hard day before competition and taking light 48 hours before competition? That is game on Friday, go light on Wednesday, and go hard on Thursday. There's a lot of different thoughts about this. Really, my thought is that I'm going to have really kick their butt when they come in the weight room. So I don't want any residual effects of that on Friday. I want the only thought on their head on Friday is dominating their opponent. I don't want them going to the trainer or coming to me on the day of a game and feeling like they need to roll out or stretch out because of what we did in the weight room. Now, if coach does something in practice that does that, that's okay. But that's why we go Monday, Wednesday, and we go hard on both those days. But then they get Thursday generally to recover and repair. So, all right. Thanks, Steve. All right. I noticed you're big on Olympic lifts. I'm not familiar with them. I tend not to teach them as I don't want to teach them wrong. Minus cleans. Are squats and deadlifts just as good for a high school program? Absolutely. That's what I tell all the coaches that I ever help with strength and conditioning. I always tell them to stick to whatever they know. So I teach the Olympic lifts because that's what I know really well. I don't do a lot of the powerlifting movements as far as like low bar back squats or banded deadlifts or those kinds of things just because I'm not familiar with them. But whatever you know best, whatever you can get your kids to do and move well with is what's going to be good for your high school program. So we squat right now because we're lifting 3 days a week. We squat every single day. So squats for sure, because that's one of the best ways to build up power and speed. And then deadlifts are a great pull as well. Kyle, what are your thoughts on German volume training? German volume training is brutal for building mass. I think it's a great training method, and we actually have used it a few times as a finisher for our workouts. We'll just do banded bicep curls or banded tricep extensions at the end. I would only ever prescribe for my athletes German volume training with single joint movement. So I would never prescribe squats or deadlifts or any of that with German volume training, just because it's not a protocol that I've used a ton and had a lot of great success with. But if it's something that you're having success with and your athletes are staying healthy, keep going with it. David, a little off the subject. What are your thoughts on the functional movement screen? My head coach has incorporated this in our off-season program before they lift. I am a high school coach. The functional movement screen is great, but I don't know about you, but I don't have the time to do it. The functional movement screen takes a long time to individually screen each athlete. So one thing that I actually found, I recently connected with coaches through the National High School Strength and Conditioning Coaches Association, was the dynamic warm-up movement assessment. So essentially, it's a movement assessment where you can assess your athletes' flexibility and stability through their joints while they're going through their warm-up.